Listen, Jovan wants you to, Jovan wants to make sure that you're his little bitch boy and his little errand boy.
That wouldn't dissuade me, Kathleen. What's the question, Jovan?
Does Kathleen think she was wrong? Wilson thinks that she does think she was wrong.
So, I think the best way to frame it then...
That beliefs require knowledge, that you need to have knowledge of a God for you to believe in that God.
Yeah, so Kathleen, do you believe the statement that you need to have knowledge to form beliefs in theism? Do you think that proposition is false? Do you think that's wrong?
I think what we came to is that they will have what they understand to be knowledge, though that knowledge could be false and therefore would not be knowledge. So they have no knowledge, but they believe that they have knowledge.
I'm gonna let you answer like that. That's perfectly fine with me. I think that's clear that that's a contradiction.
Wow.
That's a contradiction to the position I posed. So
that was brilliant. That was fucking brilliant. That wasn't gymnastics all over the fucking place.
But it's fine. I understood it perfectly, and it's contradictory to the position of knowledge, and they must have knowledge. So it's fine with me. Thank you, genuinely, Kathleen. I enjoyed the conversation, and I've gone.
I always enjoy
Awesome. Now, Kathleen's conversation wasn't wrong the entire time.
I don't care. I will recall this.
It's got nothing to do with being right or wrong. It's got to do with the conversation between two people trying to figure out a position. That's the difference. That's the difference between a conversation between me and Orson, and a conversation with you, Jovan, right? Is because Orson was actually interested in trying to understand my position, trying to see if he agreed with my position, and I
did the exact same thing I did. It was just in a nicer, bitchy way.
No, he didn't, Jovan. No, he absolutely didn't.
Yes.
The only thing you're interested in, right, is just hovering, right? That's all you all, Jovan, is an orbiter.
Catherine, I showed how you contradicted yourself multiple times.
You didn't show a fucking thing. The only thing you showed was that you're an orbiter.
Did Wilson show that you contradicted yourself?
I don't know if Wilson showed that or not.
See how it's... That was good.
It's possible that he did. It's possible that he didn't.
There was
I believe we reached a consensus.
I think in quite a few parts of the conversation you did contradict yourself, Kathleen, but each contradiction
possible.
Each contradiction was cleared up with clarifications on your part, which is fine. But it was really funny hearing you say that knowledge can be false.
Well, I think when I said that, right, I think I said that, in my mind, right, in the inner workings of my head, right, when I'm saying that, I'm saying, yes, I understand that if something is false, it's not knowledge, right, but because this person holds it to be knowledge, right, they're going to say this is knowledge. I have knowledge of this. Now, if it was shown to be false, odds are they would probably no longer call that knowledge, but up until it's shown to them to be false, to them it is knowledge.
Right, yeah, that's correct.
So it could be that I merely needed to
be more specific.
Be more specific.
Yeah, I think so, actually. But it was funny, but it's fine because we got to the bottom of it. It was funny though.
Oh my god, dude, awesome. Fucking Jovan.
Jovan roboting is funny also.
Fucking eat shit, Jovan. Sick and tired of your shit. You know what's great about Tasteless? Let me tell you what's great about Tasteless, right? Tasteless will come in here, and he doesn't fucking orbit, right? Tasteless comes in here, and for better or for worse, he's just like, I'm gonna be fucking Tasteless. I'm gonna hold my shit. Right? Jovan over there in the background, just fucking every now and then, just sniping, right? He's like Jovan. I think you should just unplug your mic and just stay in, go to text chat or something. That's where you belong.
Jovan's great. I love Jovan.
I like Tasteless better because he doesn't push your shit in like Jovan does.
No, that's got nothing to do with it. Jovan doesn't push in anyone with shit.
Jovan is perfectly within the realm of adequate.
I have been extremely impressed by Olsen. Recently, though.
Thank you.
I can no longer say Olsen's dumb.
Orson was dumb shit. I didn't even know that.
Well, that was just because he would say. Olsen knows the things he said.
I'm still. Yeah, I actually. For the first 3 months, I said some terrible things, but I learned the lingo and kind of became more coherent. Well, learning the ropes. But I'm still a global skeptic, so a lot of people will think that's really dumb.
Hey, what?
Yeah, I'm a global skeptic. Did you hear us railing on Jimbo?
No, I missed one.
Oh, right, okay. Well, yeah, I have an incoherent worldview.
Why do you hold it if you identify it as incoherent?
Well, holding it is poor words.
Alright, so what would you use as opposed to holding it?
I don't know what's going on.
Did you not just say your worldviews are incoherent? Or was that a joke?
I'm trying to be descriptive. So I would say it's more like I don't have a world. But I don't usually like getting into it because it usually just gets me to a point where I admit that I have no content and it's just, why are we talking? That's usually what happens. So it's just, it's non-productive. Hello, Incel.
Fell asleep.
Did you? But I just did so well and you missed it.
I had my headset on. Fell asleep.
Oh, shame. And now you're back to hear people talk to me about my worldview, which is great.
Like 20 minutes. I'm ready for work.
Trying to impress his lady friend again. I try to impress all British people.
Hey,
Stay together, lad.
Orson or Jovan, could you explain the difference between knowledge and certainty?
Right, I would see, I'm not, I don't think I've completed my inquiry into what these terms really are, but as far as I understand it so far, so knowledge being justified true belief, you can hold a belief, it may be true, it may turn out to be true, and you have justification for it. If it is true, then it's knowledge. If it's not true, it's not knowledge. And certainty is that you have an attitude where it must be true.
So a kind of a doubling down on the knowledge is what you're saying is certainty?
Yeah, I guess. Just more, not just double down, 100% down on the knowledge. On the fact that it is knowledge. Certainty is like a claim of knowledge, but certainty is like believing it's 100% true, or that it must be the case.
Because if you claimed you had certainty and then something came about that lessened that certainty, you would say you would fall back to knowledge at that point, like as if knowledge wasn't sustained by all of your arguments that you were just having with Kathleen about.
At that point, it depends on if the proposition is true. If the proposition is true, then yeah, you do fall back on having knowledge. But even at the point when you had certainty, you still had knowledge if the proposition is true.
Well,
if it's false, you didn't have knowledge, but you were still certain of it.
Oh, so
You just had
you're almost relegating certainty somewhere between belief and knowledge at that point, or would you say that certainty is something greater than knowledge?
no, so certainty isn't greater than knowledge. It's kind of like beside it, and that it's less important or relevant. Certainty is like an attitude.
It can apply to belief as much as it was knowledge, right? Not really specific to knowledge.
I thought it. Right, yeah, but yeah, it can apply to beliefs because you might not have a justification for your belief. You might be like, I don't know why I believe this, but I'm certain certain it's true, and that might be knowledge.
Well, you might think you have sufficient justification. It might be false, right? And the amount of justification you have causes you to think, be certain about the truth of your belief when in fact it's false or something like that, right?
Right. I think I said that. I think I outlined that could be a case. Yeah. But I don't know if that's like with JTB there, because it depends on your worldview as well. It's like because of my skepticism that leads me to the idea that we can't have knowledge, as in like we can't know that we have knowledge. But some people have worldviews where they think that they know that they can have knowledge, in which case they would claim they have knowledge even regardless of certainty, if that makes sense. That's hard to describe.
Well, what about people that claim truth and they claim knowledge, but another person might say, well, they don't have truth, and therefore they don't have knowledge.
Sorry, say that again. I'm not really sure.
Well, the justified true belief, right? It entails the word truth, and so we just kind of you get people that'll say something, they'll claim that it's true, and they'll claim that they have knowledge of it. You'll get somebody else that claims that it's not true, and therefore that they did not have knowledge. And then you can get the reverse of that, where people that say you do not have knowledge of that because what you're claiming is not true. And another problem with the JTB situation is the notion of what it means to be justified, meaning what is the isomorphic correlation between the proposition and the reality that it contends that it corresponds to.
Right.
What are the components of the justification?
That's why Yuri brought up like an objection to no, he doesn't have justification in Santa Claus because it's on he was disagreeing with like the standards which are used to declare something justification. So there is issues with calling things justification, and some people may have a justified belief but may be proven false by somebody else, which is what I think you were saying earlier when somebody says, no, it's so someone says I have knowledge, and then somebody else comes along and says, no, this is false. That person never had knowledge if it is false, but they just had justified belief. But then, like we were saying, the justification, it depends on what standards you use to assess justification, and I'm not up on that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like the Giddier case of saying, "Oh, I see two sheep on the hill over there," and then we approach the hill together and we notice that one of them is a cardboard cutout, and we at that point reassert a claim. Okay, we now know one of them is a cardboard cutout and the other one is a sheep, right? And then we could walk away from the situation and say that we know it. And like Kathleen said, only if somebody else goes up there and, let's say, analyzes the organism and says, well, it's not really a sheep. It's a crossbreed between a goat and a dog that appears to be a sheep that you named. Right? Without this problem.
I agree with
What's Steve bringing up, Michael?
Up is that I agree with Kathleen in the kind of a rebuke, and so the problem is that Kathleen said, well, one could say that they know something, such as using the sun as with Santa Claus, right? And then if we make an analog of the Santa Claus situation with the sun, saying that the sun knows that there's a Santa Claus, and we compare that to a Giddier case, right?
Well,
Where
here's the problem.
well, before you get into the
finish?
problem, my contention is that justified true belief has it's a good attempt at trying to do what it does, but it's not viable in all cases.
Right, so the
That's
problem
not.
I see.
That had nothing to do with what Kathleen was saying. 'Cause Kathleen was
No,
obviously
not exactly, because Kathleen
I-
did say this. Well, I'll just say this, right? Kathleen stated something this when Jovan chimed in. She said something like, "One can have knowledge before they have belief," and I took that as a prerequisite, meaning if one wants to claim that they're a Christian, they first must know what it is to have a God or believe in a God, and that the knowledge of the God was like a prerequisite to the belief in being a Christian God, something to that
So
effect.
her claim was that. So the problem with saying you said that the sun knows about Santa Claus. I never conceded or never agreed that the sun knows about Santa Claus because let's just assume that Santa Claus isn't real. For the sake of argument, let's just grant that. That now means that the sun didn't have knowledge because his justified belief was false. So it
Right.
never was knowledge to begin with.
Well, by that same accord, though, if you and I approached the two sheep and we saw one was a cutout and that the other one we agreed was a sheep, just to later on have somebody who studied the genetics say, no, that was a dog goat hybrid that you guys
Right.
were just confused of, then that would adapt once again the certainty or the knowledge that we held tentatively, and then you
No.
would release that knowledge and say, no, in that case we never had knowledge.
Right, I would actually say in that case. See, if you were on the hill with me and said, right, now we know this is knowledge, this is justified true belief, I wouldn't agree with you.
Right, and that's what I mean is even the module of justified true belief has some sort of leakage, a barrier, an indifferent or an ongoing means of pulling it apart. Like, oh,
No.
well, in retrospect, the geneticist was wrong. They said it was a goat dog, but really, no, it was a sheep. But it wasn't a sheep as you guys called it a sheep. It was a different kind of sheep, right?
So,
Meaning,
no, I think I disagree. So there is an epistemic issue with JTB as we're discussing it right now, but that doesn't necessarily mean that JTB will always and in all cases has a leakage issue as you described it. If you were omniscient, then JTB would be just fine. If you had an omniscient source to appeal to, then JTB would be just fine, especially if you could build on foundations.
yeah, but why would you point to a counterfactual? Meaning, I'm not omniscient, you're not omniscient, so why would you include a counterfactual and give it an if statement?
It's logically possible.
Well, and that's my point, is that ultimately the term knowledge is still a human English word that's being applied, and yet the orthodox epistemology, this JTB module, supposes some sort of exactitude to it that takes on that sort of appeal towards an omniscience, that this is the case, that this is what knowledge is, and that knowledge is justified, and that justification has some wiggle room, and that it's true, meaning that it's not the case that it can be appealed to as ever being false, and that it's a belief. And even the idea of
Right.
belief, that a belief is necessarily a proposition, as opposed to maybe some sort of abduction, or an organismal abduction. My whole point is that the module of justified true belief does have some contention as an epistemological module.
As far as, see, this is why I think I approached this in the beginning, saying that I'm not fully up on JT. But as far as I understand it, there may be literature about JTB which states it is is an exactitude, as you call it, and is almost as if it is appealing to an omniscient source. But as far as I've ever seen it used in this server and everywhere I've searched, it's always been without epistemic certainty.
Right. Well, in one way, Orson, I'm addressing you because you're a global skeptic. So I'm giving you a skepticism towards the JTB. Right. I'm attempting.
Well, I'm also skeptical of the JTB.
Right, but the Gideon case is not a skeptical argument, right? In the way that you're using it. What do you take the Gideon case to be or to mean?
Well, it's a probabilistic claim towards knowledge that's often appealed to. It's how does one approximate towards the data given?
No, so no, you could have. It is that justified true belief is not sufficient for knowledge because you could essentially be lucky, right? So if you're driving past a field and you see a barn, and it's actually a cutout, it's like a cardboard cutout, but behind the barn is an actual barn, you would be justified in believing there was a barn because you see a barn. It would also be true that there was a barn because there was a barn behind the cutout, right? But it would be a false belief because the thing that you had seen wasn't actually a barn. It's a weird situation, but like the idea is that justified true belief can't be sufficient for knowledge. It's not to say that it's wrong, but there must be something else. That's usually the argument given in cases. So like
that sounds like a play on words. That there's a cardboard cutout of a barn that you see. You believe there's a barn, but a barn exists.
Well, there is a barn. So say there's a barn behind the cutout, right? So it's true that there's a barn in the field, right? So that belief is true. And you're justified in believing it because you see this cutout, but the belief that the cutout itself is a barn is false, so it can't be knowledge, right? But yet you have justification in it's true, but yet it's not knowledge.
No,
right?
Hold on. So let me get this straight. Let me try and understand this. So we're saying the proposition is there is a barn in the field. So now we have a set area, and you begin to look around this field, and you look at the top of the hill, and you see a barn. So you go, oh, the proposition that there is a barn in the field is justified by my senses. It's true, let's say, because there is a barn there, and I believe it. So this guy goes, he's got JTB now that there's a barn in the field. He then goes up to the barn to find that it's a cutout, but also elsewhere in the field he can see a barn. So the proposition is true. The proposition of there being a barn in the field was true, but why does that mean that his belief was false?
Because what he was looking at wasn't actually a barn, right? It was just a cutout. It wasn't a barn. So the belief that there was a barn that he was looking at, even though there's a real barn somewhere else, that was false.
Well, but Coy,
so it can't be not.
The idea of the field, though, the domain of the field. Why does the field have to be behind? Why does the barn have to be behind there? Unless you're going to take some sort of perspective approach. Why can't the barn and the field be something?
It can't be knowledge. It's that on JTB, it has to count as knowledge, and that's supposed to point to a problem with JTB. Because naturally, we wouldn't want to say, "Oh, he knows there's a barn," if the reason he thinks there's a barn is because of the cutout. So a natural tendency for us is to take away the idea that he knew there was a barn. Even though everything he said qualifies under JTB, so it's supposed to point to a problem with JTB. JTB is not good enough, or something's wrong with it.
No, I want to respond to. So
right, the proposition meets all the criteria of JTB, but we would not want to call it knowledge.
That's right. That's exactly right.
No, I disagree. So, wait, what is JTB? Hold on, Mars, please don't.
Justified true belief.
So you are saying that the belief is false, but the belief there is a barn in this field is not false.
No, it's not false. It's not false. That's the point.
Listen to me. It meets all the criteria of JTB. The belief is justified and it's true, but we wouldn't call it knowledge.
Why not?
The barn is probably a bad example. You weren't aware that there was an actual. I mean, what you're looking at wasn't actually a barn, right? So the proposition there's a barn in the field is true, not in virtue of what you're actually looking at, but of luck, essentially, right? You're just lucky there happens to be an actual barn in the field, right? But you didn't actually know that.
But now this is the whole point, right? Is that Kathleen?
Justification is the issue, not the belief or the truthfulness of the
sure. That in that example, there's a problem there with what JTB could mean by justification, because here we have an example where you're fully justified, but still, you don't know, right? We wouldn't say you had knowledge because you justified your knowledge based on some cutout.
But Helena,
even though there
lieu,
just so happened to be, even though there just so happened to be a barn in the field.
right? But in lieu of ever having the disclosure of what was true, meaning, let's say you drive by, you make an assessment, you continue on, no one ever brings it up again. It never comes about again. You carry on in your world, justified, true belief. You would testify it later on. You would.
That's right. You would think you had knowledge.
Well, not only would you think it, there would be no reason. But Helena, you would have no reason to know that kind of discrepancy between something you would claim as the case later. If there was,
dude, that's a fucking spook. I can see where you're going.
Fine. Totally say it if you will.
Absolute knowledge is a spook. Don't fucking try and justify it religiously like you're about to.
I'm hardly saying that.
Mars is coming in to derail and bring us down. I'm not here to derail. I'm here to talk about why things are spooks. Then why'd you talk about God?
I'm not talking about that, Mars.
Don't get too caught up on my insults, bro. Just let the conversation flow naturally. Yeah, please don't.
Okay, so Michael, I want to acknowledge what you're saying, right? You're saying, look, there's a whole nother problem, and that is that this whole thing is stupid because you could go around your whole life thinking that you knew that there was a barn there. So what are we doing?
Right.
Why are we talking about mental exercises? Is there actually a barn somewhere, or what the fuck are we talking about? I'm really confused.
Right fucking here. But that's a different issue. So the way that's handled, that I've heard these philosophers handle that, is that they're saying, look, there's a difference between sort of application, what happens in real life, and what we're trying to do when we're philosophically trying to define, when we're trying to define what knowledge could be. And so even though it's true, maybe we could never know if anything is really true. But okay, that could be, but that's kind of unrelated to this mission of trying to find a good definition.
I don't see why it's a problem.
Well, here's the problem: is that it's always grounded in the colloquial use, meaning there's a philosophical indexing where we use the JTB as a model or as a module, and we attempt to use it, but then it's grounded out in not knowing when you apply it to real world. And so, because there's no distinction between the two, because no one, in lieu of a final authority on whether or not that was the barn or not the barn, and it's never reapproached, it's treated the same. So then you're talking about the precise analytical philosophical, but it is necessarily always grounded seemingly in the material.
There's another problem, and that's that this entire thing is stupid.
Well, Jovan, you're stupid.
So in order for it to be a problem with JTB, so the proposition is justified, it's true, and it is a belief. Of the barn being in the field, but he got to that conclusion through the cutout. I don't really see that being a problem because his beliefs thereafter would be accurate and comport to reality. I think that the only way that it should be a problem is if the opposite was true, is if he was coming to false beliefs through just wrong justifications.
You can come up with false beliefs through correct justifications, or if the way you want to say it is wrong justifications. Just another example, right? This example happens to turn on this issue of why he came to think that there was a barn.
Why is that an issue?
Because it puts truth. under erasure, meaning in lieu of knowing whether or not something's true, if it's held as true, then the person that's justified with the JTB and the person that's not justified with the JTB are synonymous, meaning there's no distinction, and there can be no distinction. That's the problem.
That is a problem. I mean, we just lay this out as like a practical term. Why would we want to describe knowledge as anything else?
It's just saying that this definition isn't sufficient because it doesn't like apply to all cases, right? And that's what the Gettier case is saying. It might be.
There's something outside of the JTB. There's something outside of JTB you want knowledge to be describing. I just don't think that.
No, you want your account of knowledge to be able to handle a case like a Gettier case, and JTB can't handle it. You have to add something to JTB because of the circumstances.
I don't see what. Yeah, but I don't care for my knowledge. My definition of knowledge to handle Gettier cases. It seems it doesn't matter. It's not. It doesn't seem like an issue.
Well, I think that's.
You're gonna.
You go ahead, Helen.
I was just gonna say, well, then that just seems. That seems like if you're going to hold to that, then there's a theoretical way that you could have a lot of problems because you're going to not withdraw knowledge from things where other people think that knowledge should be withdrawn. So you're just going to have people, in your view, having knowledge where no one else would say they had knowledge.
Right. Okay, but that would be like an issue of like communication of what knowledge is. But say if we all agreed on the definition of knowledge of just JTB and we let Gettier cases be Gettier cases inside JTB, like so that person who has knowledge for different reasons, it still has knowledge. That would be fine as like a system if we all agreed upon it. But
so you're suggesting that we ought to adopt something like JTB plus Gettier, which is a position.
No, Gettier is inside JTB. Why would it be outside of JTB?
No, it might be.
The belief was justified and true. It's not outside of JTB.
Well, this is arguable also. Is JTB a subset of Gettier? Is Gettier a subset of JTB?
Wait, no, hold on, Helen. Helena, why does it not equal knowledge?
Well, that's the point. I guess if you want to say it equals knowledge, you're going to be like a rogue maverick type, right? Because it's not going to be consistent now. Anybody?
How fucking old are you? That's my question. Derail.
Yeah, derail.
No,
Not applicable.
19. Unapplicable. 21.
No, it does not sound generous.
What? Another problem with the JTB is justified belief. The part of justified belief.
JTB is truth.
So, okay, what's the inconsistency? Helena, what's the problem with inconsistent? What's the inconsistency in
Because
keeping
there exists a proposition in which if you were aware of, then you would no longer be justified in believing it. So it's not really a justified true belief. It's only because you're unaware.
Yeah, dipshit. Right. So if it's the case that if it's not justified, then it isn't knowledge.
It is justified.
And if the justification, I'm gonna respond to my DMs, you postmodernistic milf you. So if it turns out that we later if we, upon somebody else's analysis somebody knows that it's a cutout, can point out that the justification is insufficient, then that person never had knowledge.
Wait, what? Say it again?
If somebody can analyze somebody's justification and show that so if somebody from the perspective that can see the cardboard cutout would look at the other person who believes the cardboard cutout justifies the proposition, he could then say that the justification of the person who's suffering from Gettier never was justification at all, and then therefore it was never knowledge.
Well, I don't think.
I see what he's saying. Godless, do you see what he's saying?
No, I don't.
He's saying we could just make JTB subsume Gettier cases by describing Gettier cases as not qualifying as justification. So you would just say he's not justified, and then you can keep JTB.
Yeah, but could you really keep JTB? Meaning, what is a justification? What is an isomorphic relation between a proposition of belief and right? What does that mean?
Because there's cases where if you didn't accept that belief justification you had, then you would be being irrational.
crying.
What I wanted to bring up though is this was from the conversation where I don't know if you'd hear from Roll. I was asked what I think knowledge is, and I was given the example of like, so if I had a justified belief in it might be true, it might be false. It's a skeptical analysis of JTB, and that's what I.
Do you think you guys think that using this as a definition of knowledge is helpful to determine whether people have knowledge or not? That is so ridiculous, man. People are not going to say, "Oh, okay, you tell me if I have knowledge or not. You tell me if I'm justified in believing what I believe, what I know to be true." This is just stupid.
It's just
Being an anti-intellectual,
It's a model to scrutinize.
I had a job interview in like 5 minutes. I don't know how long I'm going to be. I don't know. I need a job. I have no money. My credit card's like,
What was that? Fucking soap opera or whatever.
So with my understanding of JTB and the way that I've been applying it, there's always like a skepticism. Like, so we would never have access to knowledge. We would never have like absolute. We would never be able to absolutely claim that we have knowledge epistemically. So when we look at Gettier cases, if there is an issue, it would just be the case that it wasn't knowledge.
Well, let me just throw this out right now. If someone says there's a dog on the mat, I believe there's a dog on the mat. Right now, that died because let's say other people can see it and they claim that that's a rational isomorphic description of the proposition. The dog is on the mat. And then to say, okay, I believe that, but is that all there is to believe? Meaning, does knowledge now as a category include all generalities of knowledge? Meaning, I also believe the dog is breathing, the dog is within an atmosphere.
5 times in your sentence.
No, the point is to say that the dog is on the mat belief, that's fine as far as a proposition. Now you're going to make the proposition justified true belief, right? Now that's the belief, that's the justification for the belief. You're arguing about knowledge. Now, is knowledge a general category, or does it just assume the context of everything that is also?
I was going to say that I wouldn't think it needs to be assuming all the other rational prerequisites of like dog, for example. But then, what would dog be referring to? But that, I mean, it could be the case that the dog isn't there and dog is just. So I don't think it has to be general. As in generalize it has to support the prerequisites of dog.
What, right, but the idea that it's not a flying dog on a mat, let's say, right? It's not an Aladdin dog. It's a dog that's supported by a ground. So there's some entailed suppositions that are not mentioned as a part of the belief that are entailed with the belief.
That's what I'm saying. Is I don't think it's necessarily entailed.
Right. So
okay. The proposition.
Right. So that's the point. So, I mean, and I'm talking about a real referent, an empirical referent. And because you don't have a dog on a mat to refer to and I don't, and if we both did, it doesn't mean we're referring to the same one. So we're only referring to the signs. We're analyzing, scrutinizing the model of philosophy that points to these things. But if you're talking about a dog on a mat and that's an Aladdin dog, and I'm talking about a dog on the mat and that's entailed to the ground, then what I'm saying is, does the word knowledge at this state have any claim of equivalence to anyone else's claim of equivalence without the contextual entailments, right?
So you're saying if you said to me, I have knowledge on the carpet, I'll be able to understand the concept.
Right. I mean, I'm just my job is to kind of unfetter through the problem. Not, I mean, the module holds, people utilize it. It seems to be held generally and regularly. Is dogmatized towards the JTB as if it is the case, as if it must be the case. We always are talking about propositional logic. Okay, fine. Now let's reapproach it and let's pull it up. Let's see what how it could be reapproached and maybe not disregarded but held as a module. That's how I look at it. The JTB.
Mike is a modulator.
Our MILF's real.
I would rather hear JJ and Jason talk to each other than fuck at the Orson and Frontier Man.
It's not Frontier Man.
Mike, she just called you Frontier.
Frontier Man's called Middle Key.
Yeah, I'm really
No,
starting.
Orson, who's talking to Orson?
It's Mike Fowl.
I don't know the difference between him and I thought they were the same.
That's harsh.
Did you miss my conversation with Kathleen?
Yeah.
Oh, see, you'd have liked that one.
I just would have irritated you.
I guess I missed the big fight between Brenda and Kathleen.
I got Kathleen to say that you could have false knowledge, and that fits inside a JTB definition. Listen to me, fucker!
Okay, well, anyway, as far as my recording here on YouTube, that is my argument against the justified true belief, JTB, mixed with the Gettier, and then the isomorphic relationship between what it is to say one believes, whether or not belief is an attitude towards a proposition. If so, that proposition's isomorphic corresponding relationship towards the empirical world has to be agreed upon. And then essentially, there's a few other ways that we could pull this apart, as in scrutinizing whether or not a belief necessarily is an attitude towards a proposition, or whether or not it could be an attitude towards the state of affairs, and then what means of knowledge can we say on that. Maybe I should keep this going just for the hell of it. I'll dart back in.
Yeah, it's not about some he was Mary's roommate was just like, what's that one? And he just kind of like went through it, so it was kind of like not like he had a set sort of concrete position on it, but just kind of
He doesn't have a concrete position on really anything.
he's just kind of like, yeah, I think it's supposed to show that, you know, this is not physical. Well, that's what he was saying was the intended purpose.
He says the intuition.
He said it's a thought experiment. It's just to provoke thought.
I think there's a softer way to view it, right? So if you're going to agree with a physicalist that it just doesn't show that physicalism is false, maybe you could say, well, it shows that, knowledge has to mean something more than just propositional knowledge. You could look at it that way, and then, nobody would disagree, I don't think.
Well, that'd be using like a proprietary definition of knowledge, or equivocating.
Anyways, so there's another video about Kathleen on the Trinity, and
Okay. I'm just going to wrap it up here. Thank you for listening. Ow! Scooby-Wop.